So, think about it like this. If someone just straight up insulted you on a first date, you'd walk out immediately,
Oh,
right?
I'd check. Please, done.
Exactly. So how do, really smart, capable people end up trapped in these dynamics where they're convinced they're slowly losing their minds?
Right, because it doesn't start with an insult.
Right.
It starts with a vacation or like this grand promise, this
Yeah.
feeling that you finally found the person who perfectly understands you. Because, the most dangerous psychological malware doesn't announce itself as a threat.
It masquerades as an upgrade.
Exactly.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are, as always, thrilled to have you here. And, you know who you are. Always hungry for that thorough, structured knowledge, but without all the overwhelming noise.
Right, getting straight to the good stuff.
Exactly. And today we have a really fascinating stack of sources to unpack. We're looking at clinical articles from ThriveWorks and Psychology Today.
Some really heavy hitters there.
Yeah, plus a comprehensive scoping review of academic literature on gaslighting. We've got some field guides from the Power Moves and societal frameworks from RTT Research.
It is a pretty wide range of material, clinically and academically, but they all actually deconstruct the exact same behavioral mechanisms.
Yeah.
We are essentially looking at the foundational code of coercion today.
The foundational code, I like that. Because our mission today is really to decode that hidden architecture, right? We want to equip you with like a mental defense matrix, the ability to recognize these covert tactics, whether they're, happening in your intimate relationships or workplace dynamics, or even right in front of you in your online feeds.
And obviously to respond without completely losing your sanity.
Right. So to build that defense,
Yeah.
I feel like we have to understand the vulnerabilities this code targets first.
Oh, absolutely. Because manipulators, they aren't usually hacking our flaws, They're actually exploiting our natural human empathy. Yeah, they use our mental shortcuts, what psychologists call heuristics, and our fundamental desire for connection.
So it's not a bug, it's a feature they're exploiting.
Exactly. The intrusion works because it basically bypasses our logical firewall by triggering our deepest emotions.
So, okay, before a malicious script can wreak havoc, it usually has to be invited in, right? Like you click a link because it looks amazing.
Right, you get the shiny email.
Yeah. So let's start at the beginning in what the clinical sources actually call the idealization stage of a relationship.
Right, so the clinical term you'll hear a lot here is love bombing.
Love bombing, yeah.
According to the Psychology Today sources, this is the first of 3 essential stages in a manipulative dynamic. And idealization involves these grand, unreciprocated romantic gestures and, like, excessive flattery.
Right.
But the underlying psychological purpose there is speed.
The sources have described things like whisking you off on luxurious vacations immediately, or saying things like, I've never felt this way about anyone before, within, like, days of meeting.
Which feels amazing, right?
It feels like a total whirlwind.
Yeah, but the manipulator wants to accelerate that emotional bonding process to create a chemical dependency. By flooding you with affection, they trigger massive dopamine spikes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they are actively trying to lock you down, overwhelming your rational brain before you even have a chance to evaluate their character objectively.
And a huge part of that speed involves something called future faking.
Yes, that's a big one.
Charlie Health defines this as making massive promises about a shared future.
Yeah.
So booking trips for next year, picking out names for future babies, looking at apartments.
And you've only been dating for 3 weeks.
Right, exactly.
It creates this synthetic hope. Future faking gives you an idealized vision to basically hold on to.
Right.
So when things inevitably get bad later, the victim will tolerate an immense amount of mistreatment because they're essentially just waiting for that promised future to arise.
They're holding out for the dream.
Yeah. They endure the terrible present because they actually believe they are just one argument away from that dream life.
Okay, wait, let me pause you there. Because when you're excited about someone new, you naturally talk about the future, right?
Sure.
You dream a little bit. How is that manipulation and not just like a really intense honeymoon phase?
That's a great question. You're conflating genuine enthusiasm with calculated extraction.
Oh.
Yeah. The difference really lies in action and consistency. In a healthy dynamic, people dream about the future, but their daily actions move at a sustainable pace.
Right, they actually build it.
Exactly. Manipulation uses the future to bypass the present. The grand promises aren't about building a life at all.
What are they about?
They're a shortcut. It's just to secure your compliance so that you are emotionally isolated when the bad behavior inevitably begins.
Wow. So they are essentially buying up all the emotional real estate up front using fake currency.
That is exactly what it is,
Yeah.
fake currency. And once they secure that real estate, they start tearing up the floorboards.
Yikes.
Yeah, because a manipulator cannot maintain a perfect facade forever. The emotional energy required to love bomb is just exhausting.
Right.
So when they inevitably withdraw that affection, the sudden absence pulls the victim directly into the second stage, which is devaluation.
Devaluation.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is where the psychological distortion truly takes hold. The scoping review we looked at traces the history of the term gaslighting, which, has exploded into the mainstream lately.
Oh, it's everywhere now.
Right, but it actually originates from a 1938 play called Gaslight by Patrick Hamilton.
Yeah, and in the play, a husband deliberately dims the gaslights in their home. And when his wife points out the flickering lights, he denies it entirely, claiming she is just imagining things.
Just flat out denies it.
Yeah, his whole goal is to make her think she's losing her mind so he can have her institutionalized and steal her inheritance.
Which is wild.
Mm-hmm.
And the academic review shows this really fascinating evolution of how we actually understand this tactic today.
Right.
Because back in the 60s and 70s, the medical literature described gaslighting as a manipulator trying to deceive a third party, like convincing a psychiatrist that a partner was crazy.
But by the 1980s, researchers realized the ultimate target wasn't the outside world at all.
It was the victim themselves.
Yes, the victim's own mind. The modern definition centers on convincing the victim of their own epistemic incompetence.
Epistemic incompetence.
Basically forcing you to outsource your reality testing to the abuser.
Okay, the ThriveWorks article has this chillingly mundane example of how this operates day to day.
The salmon story.
Yes, the salmon story. So there's this couple, Diane and Jack. Diane makes salmon for dinner. Jack gets furious, claiming he's told her 1,000,000 times he absolutely hates salmon.
Right.
Diane doesn't remember this at all, obviously, but she apologizes. Then, like a week later, they're at a friend's house. Jack is happily eating salmon and asks Diane why she never makes it.
Unbelievable.
And when she brings up the huge fight from last week, he calls her crazy and completely denies ever saying he hated it.
See, he is attacking her internal compass there. He's putting a magnet next to her sense of true north so she can no longer trust her own navigation.
It's not even about the fish.
No, it's not about the salmon. It is entirely about Jack establishing himself as the absolute sole arbiter of reality.
Which is like the boiling frog apologue, right? Like if someone called you crazy on a first date, you'd jump out of the pot.
Right.
But because they slowly turn up the heat, questioning tiny, insignificant memories like a dinner menu, you don't realize your compass is corrupted until your reality is entirely dependent on them.
Exactly. And when Diane tries to defend her memory in that situation, Jack uses a defensive strategy researchers call DARVO.
Oh, wait, DARVO. Break that down.
It stands for deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender.
Right. So he denies the event happened, attacks her memory, and suddenly reverses the roles. So now he is the victim of her constant nagging.
It is a complete inversion of cause and effect. And, the academic review emphasizes that this inversion relies really heavily on exploiting societal and gender stereotypes.
Absolutely.
Just impartially speaking, across various cultures, manipulators often weaponize these tropes, labeling women as, overreactive, hysterical, or too emotional.
Right.
They use society's pre-existing biases to basically legitimize their false narrative and delegitimize the victim's perfectly normal reactions.
And the harm this causes is just profound. The sources consistently report that victims suffer an erosion of identity and a severe loss of self-confidence.
It's devastating.
The victim's entire life just becomes consumed with managing the manipulator's volatile emotions just to feel like a baseline sense of safety.
But eventually, the cognitive dissonance becomes too heavy, right? The victim starts to recognize the pattern and tries to pull away or set a boundary.
They try to break out.
Yeah, and when the gaslighting stops working, the manipulator can no longer rely on the illusions of that idealization phase. They have to reach for a leash.
And that's when they pivot to guilt.
Bingo.
This is the realm of guilt tripping and what the sources call the pity play. When a manipulator feels their control slipping, they flip the script entirely. Instead of being the aggressor, they play the wounded victim to deflect responsibility and trigger your empathy.
And the field guide from the Power Moves notes a crucial strategic reality here. Guilt tripping is often a weapon of last resort for individuals who actually have no real leverage.
Right, because it relies 100% on the target being a sensitive person with a conscience.
Exactly. If you don't care about others, A guilt trip does nothing to you.
It bounces right off.
Yeah. It is a targeted exploitation of your good nature.
And it frequently leads to the vacuum effect, right? What psychologists call hoovering, named after the vacuum cleaner brand.
The hoovering stage, yes.
So when the victim reaches the discard stage and tries to leave, the manipulator suddenly shows up with intense apologies. They revert back to that day one love bombing, promising they'll go to therapy, or they execute a massive pity play, claiming they won't survive without you.
They are literally trying to suck you back into the cycle.
Okay, but look, let me play devil's advocate for a second.
Sure.
Like, a parent saying, "You never call me, do you even care about me?" is a guilt trip.
Yeah, it is.
Are they emotionally abusing their kid? Like, where is the line between a bad communication habit and psychological manipulation?
That's fair. You're confusing a clumsy request with systematic control.
Oh,
A parent might use guilt poorly because they simply lack the emotional maturity to just say, I miss you.
right.
But a manipulator uses guilt systematically. It's a patterned behavior to deliberately bypass your boundaries and avoid accountability.
Oh, I see.
To clarify this, ThriveWorks draws a pretty sharp contrast. In healthy conflict, both people focus on solving the current issue, right?
Right.
But in a manipulative dynamic, your attempt to set a boundary is treated as a personal attack. Past issues are brought up to deflect, and you are actively punished until you drop the boundary.
So it's the difference between accidentally stepping on someone's toe because you're a bad dancer and deliberately stomping on their foot so they can't leave the dance floor.
That is a painful analogy, but highly accurate.
Well, we've been looking at how this operates in a one-on-one living room dynamic. But, human psychology doesn't magically change when we log onto the internet.
Nope, same brains?
We take the exact same vulnerable hardware online. And this is where we turn to the RTT research framework. Because these intimate vulnerabilities are exploited at a massive scale by bad actors in digital spaces.
Yeah. The behavioral mechanisms are identical. They simply scale up. Like in a toxic relationship, a manipulator uses triangulation, right?
Bringing in a third party.
Yeah, making you feel isolated by saying things like, even your friends think you're overreacting. Well, the RTT framework shows how this intimate tactic scales up into polarization online.
Because algorithms exploit our tendency to self-categorize into us versus them.
Exactly.
Just as an abusive partner isolates you from your friends, online manipulators use polarizing rhetoric to widen the gap between groups. It destroys empathy and makes you feel like your specific in-group is the only safe harbor on the internet.
And gaslighting on a macro scale turns into what RTT calls manufacturing doubt.
Manufacturing doubt.
Yeah. Making sense of complex issues like science or global economics requires, significant cognitive effort. And our brains prefer cognitive ease.
They want it simple.
Right. Malicious actors understand this. They don't necessarily need to convince you of a specific lie. They just flood the zone with conflicting information.
Confuse everyone.
By intentionally distorting scientific consensus, they create cognitive overload. They are gaslighting the public's perception of reality, so you throw your hands up and conclude that nothing can be trusted.
Wow. And we also see the macro version of pushing your buttons, right? Like when a toxic partner deliberately provokes you to get a reaction so they can call you hysterical.
Right.
RTT links that directly to intentional trolling or baiting online.
This is essentially the weaponization of the amygdala.
The amygdala.
Yeah, the emotional center. Ideologically motivated trolling uses inflammatory language to deliberately trigger a fight-or-flight response, which is usually outrage.
Outrage.
And when you are flooded with anger, the prefrontal cortex, the logical, critical thinking part of your brain, literally shuts down. You cannot think critically when you are outraged.
You're just reacting.
Exactly.
The RTT framework also highlights conspiratorial reasoning and discrediting. Instead of addressing a valid argument, they simply attack the credibility of the person making it.
Yeah.
And I want to emphasize strongly here that the sources are clear. These online manipulation tactics are entirely agnostic.
Very important point.
Right, just to be completely impartial. They're utilized across the entire political spectrum, left, right, and center. Our goal in this deep dive is strictly to decode the behavioral mechanics of how these tactics work, not to, analyze any specific political ideology. The virus doesn't care what operating system you're in. It just looks for an open port.
And the open port is always emotion.
Always.
If we connect all these sources from the romantic partner future faking you to the online bot manufacturing doubt, the unifying theory is that the tactic only succeeds if it can bypass your logic. Whether it evokes fake hope, manufactured outrage, or deep empathy, The goal is to short-circuit your critical thinking.
It's like a magician's sleight of hand. By evoking outrage, they force you to stare at the flashy distraction. While you're flooded with emotion, the real trick, shifting your worldview or eroding your boundaries, is happening quietly in the background.
Yeah. And understanding the cognitive mechanics of that attack is your first line of defense.
So let's talk about patching the system.
Let's do it.
Now that we actually see the code of the matrix, how do we neutralize the threat? Let's get into the actionable playbook for the listener.
Okay, so the clinical sources offer highly effective strategies, starting internally with something called reality anchoring.
Reality anchoring.
Yeah. When someone is actively trying to warp your perception, you have to fight back with internal validation. You use fact versus feeling statements.
Right. So if someone is trying to rewrite history, you say to yourself, I know what I experienced, even if they have a different perception. You stop seeking their agreement to confirm your own reality.
Exactly. You stabilize your own compass. And once you are internally anchored, you can employ a behavioral defense known as gray rocking.
Gray rocking.
Which is the practice of deliberately disengaging emotionally from the manipulator. You make your reactions as boring, brief, and uninteresting as a gray rock.
Which goes back to Diane and Jack. When Jack denies the Shannon incident and starts screaming to provoke a fight, instead of crying or defending her memory, Diane just says, noted, and walks into the other room.
She is starving the fire of oxygen. A manipulator pushes buttons, expecting a neurochemical payout your emotional distress.
Right.
When you give them nothing but a neutral, surface-level response, you cause cognitive dissonance for the manipulator. The button isn't working, and eventually they stop pressing it.
I see why it works, but I have to push back here.
Okay.
Because if my partner is visibly upset and I just stare at them and say, noted, I mean, I'm being passive-aggressive. I'm being toxic.
I completely see why it looks that way on the surface, but you're confusing the weapon with the armor. Yeah. Giving someone a silent treatment is an offensive tactic. It is designed to punish, confuse, and control the other person.
Right.
Gray rocking is a defensive shield. It is designed to protect your nervous system from going into fight or flight and to de-escalate a volatile situation. You only raise the shield when someone is actively swinging a sword at you.
That makes so much sense.
You would never use gray rocking in a healthy relationship during a normal disagreement.
A shield, not a sword. Got it. Now, for situations where gray rocking isn't enough, the Power Moves introduces a concept called dominant framing.
Yes, because abuse is not a frame you negotiate with, you do not mirror their anger, and you do not try to reason with an irrational attack.
Right.
Establishing dominant framing means you push back with calm power. You recognize the game, you name the dynamic, and you alter the neurochemical state of the interaction by demonstrating an absolute willingness to walk away.
The Your Tango article provided some brilliant, really specific deflection phrases to maintain your boundary without getting pulled into the med.
Oh, I loved those.
Like if someone is guilt-tripping you, you can say, I understand that you're upset, but I'm not changing my mind.
Simple. And to deflect a pity play, you state, I'm not responsible for your feelings about my choices.
Yes. And my personal favorite for shutting down circular arguments, let's agree to disagree on this. It just closes the door.
Those phrases work so effectively because they basically refuse the bait.
Yeah.
You acknowledge the other person's emotional state without taking ownership of it, which leaves the manipulator with absolutely nothing to grab onto.
All right, let's summarize the journey we've been on today.
It's been a lot.
It has. We started in the synthetic hope of the idealization phase, looking at the overwhelming speed of love bombing and future faking.
Right.
We saw how the mask slips into the devaluation stage, unpacking the corrupted compass of gaslighting, the Darview defense, and the weaponization of guilt and hoovering.
And then we scaled all those cognitive mechanisms up, right? Examining the RTT framework to see how intimate tactics like triangulation and baiting are utilized to manufacture doubt and drive polarization on a massive societal level.
Finally, we armed ourselves with tactical defenses, stabilizing our compass with reality anchoring, starving the fire with the gray rock method, and holding our boundaries with dominant framing.
The full defense matrix.
Exactly. And, knowing these concepts isn't just about walking around and diagnosing everyone in your life as a narcissist.
Yeah.
It's really about auditing the flow of information and the power dynamics you participate in. It's about recognizing when someone or an algorithm is trying to bypass your logic by hacking your emotions.
Yeah, and I want to leave you with a final paradigm shift to ponder here.
Okay.
We frequently view victims of manipulation as weak, gullible, or, somehow lacking. But consider the mechanisms we've deconstructed today. Manipulation fundamentally relies on exploiting a person's empathy, their trust, their willingness to forgive, and their deep desire to see the best in others.
Right. Like we said, the weapon of last resort only works on people with a conscience.
Exactly. So is it possible that manipulators aren't actually preying on your weaknesses at all?
Wow.
What if they are, in fact, weaponizing your greatest strengths?
That is a huge shift.
If that is true, the ultimate defense isn't about becoming a cold, cynical person who trusts no one. It is simply about learning to trust yourself more than you trust the illusion.
I love that. You have to be the admin of your own system. Don't let the malware convince you that your screen is broken just because it wants control of your keyboard. Stay sharp, trust your own compass, and we will see you on the next deep dive.